The forgotten road. Rachel tapped the steering wheel impatiently, glancing at the clock on the dashboard. She was already an hour behind schedule, and the sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon. The long stretch of empty highway ahead seemed endless, winding through a desolate countryside with no sign of life in sight. Her GPS chimed, pulling her attention to the screen. A new route had been suggested, a shortcut that would supposedly shave 30 minutes off her drive. Rachel frowned at the narrow unpaved road leading into the woods, barely visible in the dimming light. She hesitated. The shortcut wasn't on the map, but the thought of arriving even later made her stomach churn. She had a big client meeting first thing in the morning, and her boss wouldn't tolerate any excuses. Rachel sighed and, against her better judgment, turned onto the road. At first, the drive was uneventful. The trees on either side of the road were thick and dark, their branches stretching overhead like skeletal arms. The further she drove, the narrower the road became. Soon it felt like the trees were closing in on her. The GPS showed no turns, just a straight shot through the woods. But the further she went, the more isolated she felt. The smooth hum of her car engine was the only sound. No birds, no wind, just silence. Rachel's hands tightened on the wheel. The road had turned rougher, with potholes that jolted her with each bump. She glanced at the GPS again. The blue dot hadn't moved in a while. Her phone had no signal, not even a single bar. Great, she muttered. She tapped the screen, but nothing changed. The road stretched on, unmarked and unfamiliar. She began to feel uneasy, glancing in her rearview mirror more often than she normally would. Something about this road felt off. Maybe it was the suffocating quiet, or the way the shadows seemed to flicker at the edges of her vision. Her car jerked suddenly, the engine sputtering. "No, no, no," she whispered, pressing the gas pedal harder. The car coughed one last time and died, leaving her stranded in the middle of nowhere, with the darkness closing in around her. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos. Rachel sat in stunned silence for a moment, gripping the steering wheel as if holding on could somehow will the car back to life. Her breath came out in short, panicked gasps as she stared at the dashboard, the engine completely silent now. She tried the ignition again. Nothing. The engine didn't even sputter this time. "Come on," she muttered, turning the key again and again, each attempt more desperate than the last. Only a faint clicking sound responded, mocking her efforts. She leaned back in her seat, heart racing, and stared out into the gathering dusk. The forest loomed around her, thick and oppressive. The air inside the car felt stifling. Rachel grabbed her phone from the passenger seat and glanced at the screen. Still no signal. She opened the GPS app, but it was frozen, stuck on the same spot with no indication of how far she had come or how much farther she had to go. She was completely cut off. "Of course," she sighed, tossing the phone back onto the seat. The forest was eerily still. There were no sounds of wildlife, no birds chirping, no insects buzzing, just the whispering of the wind through the trees. Rachel realized with a sinking feeling that she hadn't seen another car in over an hour. If she was going to get out of here, she would have to walk. She scanned the darkening road ahead and behind her, trying to decide which direction to take. The thought of leaving the car in the middle of the woods unsettled her, but she had no choice. Rachel popped the hood and stepped out, her shoes crunching on the gravel beneath her. The air outside was cooler, but something about it felt wrong, too still. She propped the hood up and stared at the engine, but her limited knowledge of cars told her nothing. Everything looked fine, which only made her more frustrated. A rustling sound from the woods made her jump. She spun around, eyes scanning the dense trees, but saw nothing. Her heart hammered in her chest. The shadows between the trees seemed to shift. She shook her head, trying to steady herself. "I have to find help," she whispered, closing the hood and grabbing her flashlight from the car. With no other options, Rachel began walking down the lonely, abandoned road. Rachel walked along the desolate road, her footsteps echoing eerily in the silent woods. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the gravel path. Her flashlight flickered, illuminating only a few feet ahead at a time. The trees seemed to close in on her, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers against the darkening sky. She kept glancing over her shoulder, feeling as if the shadows were shifting, as if something or someone was watching her from the depths of the woods. But every time she stopped and listened, there was only silence, the kind that pressed on her ears and made her feel isolated and vulnerable. "Get a grip," she whispered to herself, her voice sounding too loud in the empty space. After walking for what felt like hours, Rachel spotted something ahead, a small rusted sign partially hidden by overgrown weeds. She hurried toward it, hoping it would give her some clue about where she was. As she got closer, she shone the flashlight on it, revealing faded, peeling letters. "Private property. Do not enter." Rachel frowned, her heart sinking. There was no mention of this road being private on her GPS. She looked around, but there was no gate, no fences, no sign of any house or building nearby, just the endless stretch of road disappearing into the darkness. She felt a chill creep up her spine. Suddenly a rustling sound came from the woods to her left. Rachel froze, her heart pounding. She turned the flashlight in the direction of the sound, but the beam revealed only dense undergrowth and twisted branches. She stood there, holding her breath, ears straining for any other noises. Then, faintly, she thought she heard something else, a low whisper carried by the wind, just at the edge of hearing. It was too quiet to make out any words, but it sounded human, like someone speaking just out of reach. Her mind raced. Was someone out there, another traveler, or worse, someone watching her? "Hello?" she called out, her voice shaking slightly. No response. Only the oppressive silence of the woods. Rachel felt a deep unease settle over her as the whispering faded. She tightened her grip on the flashlight and hurried down the road, her pulse quickening with every step. Rachel's nerves were fraying by the minute. She'd been walking for over an hour, her legs aching and her mind racing with thoughts of what might be lurking in the woods. The oppressive silence weighed on her, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves that made her jump every time. The flashlight beam flickered weakly in front of her, casting long shadows across the deserted road. Just as she was about to give in to the growing panic, she saw something ahead, a figure moving slowly in the distance. Her heart leapt with both relief and hesitation. Someone else? Maybe help? Or was it something worse? She couldn't afford to let her paranoia take over. As she moved closer, the figure became clearer. It was a man, his clothes dirty and worn, his walk sluggish. Rachel's first instinct was to shout out, but she held back, watching him carefully. The man finally noticed her and raised a hand in acknowledgement. Relief washed over her. Maybe he was lost, too. "Hey, thank God! I thought I was the only one out here," Rachel called as she approached, her voice shaky but hopeful. The man stopped and turned toward her. Up close, he looked even more disheveled than she had realized. His face was pale, and his eyes looked tired, as if he hadn't slept in days. He gave her a weak smile. "Yeah, same here," he said. "I'm Tom. Got stuck out here yesterday when my car broke down. This road doesn't lead anywhere. I've been walking for hours." Rachel's initial relief was tempered by confusion. "Yesterday? How long have you been out here?" Tom hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. I'm not sure, really. It's hard to tell time in this place. No matter how far I walk, I just seem to end up back where I started. Rachel felt a chill run through her. What do you mean? That doesn't make sense. There has to be a way out. Tom shrugged, his expression distant. I thought so, too. But this road, it's not normal. Something about it. I don't know. Rachel's stomach twisted in knots. Something about Tom's story didn't sit right with her, but he was the only other person she had seen. She didn't have a choice. Maybe we can figure it out together, she said, trying to steady her voice. Tom nodded, though his eyes seemed distracted, like he was watching something in the distance. The silence between Rachel and Tom grew heavier as they walked. The road seemed to stretch on forever, twisting and turning with no signs of civilization. Rachel kept glancing at Tom, who seemed oddly calm despite his strange story. His face was gaunt, his eyes tired, but his pace remained steady, as if he had been through this countless times before. After what felt like hours, Rachel noticed something up ahead on the side of the road, a shape half hidden by the overgrown weeds. Her heart raced, thinking it might be another person, maybe even a car that could help them get out of this nightmare. As they got closer, she realized it was, in fact, a car, but something about it filled her with dread. It was old, rusted, and covered in a thin layer of dirt. The windows were cracked, and the tires were deflated, as if it had been sitting there for years. But what made Rachel's blood run cold was the model and color. It was the same as her own car. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. That's impossible," she whispered. Tom walked ahead, seemingly unfazed by the sight of the abandoned car. Rachel hesitated, her mind racing. Could it be her car? No, it couldn't be. Her car had broken down miles back, hadn't it? Yet, the more she looked at it, the more familiar it seemed. The same dent on the side, the same bumper sticker. She hurried forward and peered inside the car. The interior was a mess, old and worn, with scattered personal belongings, a jacket, an empty water bottle, and a notebook. Her notebook. She grabbed it, her fingers trembling as she opened it. Inside were her notes from work, exactly where she had left them. Her heart pounded in her chest. "This is my car, but how?" Tom glanced back at her, his expression unreadable. "I told you, this road doesn't make sense." Rachel's mind spun. She couldn't grasp what was happening. How could her car be here when she had left it miles back? She turned to Tom, her voice rising in panic. "What's going on? How did my car get here?" Tom looked down the road, his voice low and unsettlingly calm. "The road plays tricks on you. It bends time, space. It wants you to stay." Rachel's stomach turned. She suddenly felt trapped, like the road was swallowing her whole. And then, as if to confirm her worst fears, she saw it. Strange, twisted carvings scratched into the trunk of the car, symbols she had never seen before, but somehow knew weren't meant to be understood. Rachel's pulse raced as the realization sunk in. Something was terribly wrong with this road. The appearance of her own abandoned car, rusted and covered in dirt, was impossible. She glanced nervously at Tom, who seemed unsettlingly calm, as if resigned to the twisted reality of this place. "We need to keep moving," Tom said, his voice steady but devoid of hope. "There's an old cabin up ahead. We can rest there." Rachel hesitated. The thought of venturing deeper into this nightmare, especially with someone she no longer trusted, made her stomach churn. But what choice did she have? The daylight was fading fast, and with it, her chances of finding any way out. Nodding reluctantly, she followed Tom down the road, her mind swirling with fear and confusion. The cabin appeared after another half hour of walking, barely visible through the dense woods. It was small and decrepit, with rotting wood and a sagging roof. A single window covered in grime reflected the last rays of the sun. The place looked abandoned, like it hadn't been touched in years, but there was something off about it. A feeling of being watched crept over her as they approached. "We'll be safe here for the night," Tom said, pushing open the creaky door without hesitation. Inside, the air was musty, thick with dust and decay. Rachel stepped in cautiously, her flashlight casting long, eerie shadows across the room. The cabin was empty, except for a few pieces of broken furniture and a pile of old, yellowed papers scattered across the floor. Rachel's eyes landed on a tattered map pinned to the wall. It showed a winding road through the woods, but unlike the one they had been walking, this one ended in a large X, right where the cabin stood. She looked closer and noticed strange symbols drawn around the map, the same twisted markings she had seen scratched into her abandoned car. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom sat down on a broken chair, his face drawn and weary. "It's a trap. This road. It's meant to lure people in, keep them here. Those who come here don't leave. They become part of it." Rachel's stomach dropped. "Part of it? What are you talking about?" Tom's eyes met hers, dark and hollow. "I've been stuck here for years, and now, so are you." Rachel's breath caught in her throat as the shadows in the cabin seemed to grow darker, closing in around them. Rachel stared at Tom, her mind reeling from his words. Years? No, it couldn't be true. This was a road, a real, physical road, and she had just been driving on it. But deep down, she felt the chill of his words sink into her bones. The forest outside the cabin seemed to press in closer, the darkness thickening as the last remnants of daylight faded completely. "I don't believe you," Rachel whispered, backing away. "There has to be a way out." Tom shook his head slowly. "I thought the same thing when I first got here. Everyone does. But the road, it changes. It loops back on itself, and no matter how far you walk, you end up right where you started." Rachel's breath quickened. "Then why haven't you tried harder? Why are you just sitting here?" "I tried," he said, his voice low and filled with an unsettling calm. "But this place, it asks for something in return if you want to leave. A price. A sacrifice." "What kind of sacrifice?" Rachel asked, her voice barely audible. Tom stood up and walked to the window, peering out into the thick blackness of the woods. "People have disappeared here for decades, maybe longer. It takes them, the forest, the road, whatever it is. They vanish, and their souls get trapped. The only way out is to offer it something, someone else. A life for a life." Rachel recoiled in horror. "You're saying we have to kill someone? That's insane." Tom turned to face her, his eyes reflecting a deep, hollow resignation. "Not just anyone. The forest chooses. It picks someone who's entered the road, and it's not just a random sacrifice. It has to be someone connected to the place. It's already started with you, Rachel." Rachel's heart slammed against her chest. She backed up, shaking her head in disbelief. "No, this is crazy. I'm not part of whatever this is." Tom's gaze sharpened. "Look at the signs. Your car, the carvings. It's marked you. It wants you to stay, and if you don't pay the price, it will make sure you never leave." Rachel's mind raced as the suffocating weight of the cabin pressed in on her. She had to get out, now. Ignoring Tom's warnings, she grabbed her flashlight and rushed toward the door, her hands shaking as she threw it open. "Rachel, don't!" Tom shouted after her, but she was already sprinting into the dark woods, her breath ragged as the trees seemed to close in, their twisted branches clawing at her as she ran blindly down the path. The whispers in the woods grew louder, surrounding her, calling her name. Rachel's legs burned as she sprinted down the dark, endless road. The forest around her felt alive, moving in ways that defied logic. The trees, with their gnarled branches, seemed to reach out, scraping at her clothes, trying to pull her back. The whispers grew louder, now distinctly calling her name, but she couldn't stop. She wouldn't stop. Tom's voice echoed in her mind. "It's already started with you, Rachel." Panic gripped her, tightening with every step. The flashlight in her hand flickered, casting erratic beams that only made the woods more disorienting. Her thoughts raced, but one thing was clear. She had to keep moving. There had to be a way out. She refused to believe she was trapped, not like Tom, not like the others he had talked about. Suddenly, the road ahead shifted, curving in a direction she hadn't seen before. Without thinking, Rachel veered left, following the new path. The whispers turned to shouts, angry, as if she was defying something unseen. She forced herself to keep going, her breath ragged, her pulse pounding in her ears. Up ahead, something glimmered in the distance, a faint light. Hope surged through her chest, pushing her forward. She stumbled, her foot catching on a root, but she caught herself, determined not to fall. As she neared the light, it became clear. It was a car. A new car, its headlights casting a reassuring glow on the road. Rachel rushed toward it, tears of relief welling in her eyes. It wasn't her old abandoned car. It was someone else's, someone real. She could see a figure behind the wheel, illuminated by the headlights. They were waving at her, urging her to hurry. She reached the car, breathless, banging on the window. The driver, a middle-aged man with a kind face, rolled it down, his expression concerned. "Are you okay?" "What are you doing out here?" he asked. Rachel gasped for air, her voice hoarse. "Please, I've been stuck here. The road, there's something wrong with it. You have to help me." The man frowned. "What do you mean?" "This is just the old county road. It's been closed for years, but it still leads to town. Hop in. I'll get you out of here." Rachel hesitated for a split second, her mind reeling. Closed for years. She glanced back down the road, into the suffocating darkness. The whispers had faded, but she could still feel the weight of the woods watching her, waiting. She turned to the man, her heart hammering. Without another word, she climbed into the car, slamming the door behind her. As they drove away, the forest slowly receded into the distance. But in her rearview mirror, Rachel saw something that made her blood run cold. Tom stood at the edge of the road, watching her leave, his figure slowly swallowed by the shadows. His face, pale and hollow, twisted into a knowing smile. Rachel looked away, refusing to glance back again as the car sped toward the town, the road behind her fading into the night. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos.